and appropriate that it was on Tu B'Shvat. Beautiful way to celebrate the holiday. Okay, well, we'll get started. Again, feel free to leave your screens on or off. You know, as Rabbi Zach Zeisman was saying, he's going to be eating, so I appreciate him keeping his screen off while he's eating. Actually, I don't care. You can keep your screen on, off, doesn't matter. Really nice to be with you all. Great Torah portion for us to engage with today. So we'll study, we'll look at some of the texts, and the most important part, of course, your interpretations, your thoughts. I'm going to, excuse me, I have something stuck in my throat. I'm going to kind of go through a few parts of the Torah portion that I think are really key and interesting, and then I'm going to want your interpretations. And of course, always we should be looking at these in the frame, not just historically and theologically, but what's the personal connection that we can draw from what this story is trying to teach us personally, or us as a community, or related to what's going on in our world today. So let's begin with the blessing for engaging in the study of Torah. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Praised are you, Adonai our God, ruler of the universe, who commands us to engage in the study of Torah. All right, we're in the Torah portion, Beshallach, amazing Torah portion, very well known, and next week we get the Ten Commandments. So talk about a great section of the Torah. We just got through the 10 plagues. We have now moved out of Egypt and we're on our way, on the journey, the beginning of the journey. And of course, the first place we get to is the famous scene, made famous by the movie Ten Commandments, where the sea is split and we walk through to the other side. I just want to show you a picture for those of you who haven't had an up close and personal view of a Torah recently, which I would assume is the majority of you, since we're not gathering together in person. I think the only people who are really getting up close and personal are B'nai Mitzvah students, who we deliver a Torah to the week, the days prior to their bar bat mitzvah, and then they have the Torah for their ceremony, and then they return it to the synagogue. But I just want to show you, if you haven't seen one recently, or you haven't ever looked at this section of the Torah itself, if you notice this beautiful artistic interpretation that's woven in literally into the script itself for the Song of the Sea, the crossing of the sea. And I haven't looked, if you look right in here, I don't know if you can see me highlighting, Mi chamocha ba'elim Adonai, right? So we have right there, smack in the middle of the Song of the Sea, which if you look at it, right, really is an interpretation of the splitting of the sea. You got the two columns of water here, and you have the dry land where the Israelites walk through. There are very few spots in the Torah where you find artistic representations of the story itself. Very, very rare. I mean, another one which you could potentially say is an artistic representation would potentially be the priestly blessing, which kind of maybe you could see is like this in the Torah, but very few places. So here we have this wonderful symbolism right there in the Torah to represent this key moment. So what I want us to do is I want to look actually not so much at the crossing of the sea itself, one passage that comes right before it, and then actually look at what happens after we cross the sea. From the moment we cross the sea to some of the interesting developments that take place in this Torah portion that are all precursors to the big show next week with the Ten Commandments. So we're going to begin. I'll share my screen. Hopefully you saw I put a Word doc and the link to the Torah portion in there, so you can follow along if you want, but I'll also share my screen. So we're gonna start off right away with the Pharaoh is now chasing after the Israelites, and this is what happens. It says, as Pharaoh drew near, the Israelites caught sight of the Egyptians advancing upon them. Greatly frightened, the Israelites cried out to the Lord. This is an old text. And they said to Moses, was it for want of graves in Egypt that you brought us to die in the wilderness? What have you done to us, taking us out of Egypt? Is this not the very thing we told you in Egypt, saying, let us be and we will serve the Egyptians, for it is better for us to serve the Egyptians than to die in the wilderness? But Moses said to the people, have no fear. Stand by and witness the deliverance which the Lord will work for you today. For the Egyptians whom you see today, you will never see again. The Lord will battle for you. You hold your peace. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Why do you cry out to me? Tell the Israelites to go forward. And you lift up your rod and hold out your arm over the sea and split it, so that the Israelites may march into the sea on dry ground." We just got through the 10 plagues, right? God figured out a way to get us out of this land of Egypt where we had been enslaved for hundreds of years. And now, right when we're on our way out, the Israelites start complaining to Moses about, what, you took us out of Egypt so we could just get mowed down by the Egyptians as they come after us? What's going on with that? And then Moses says, "Have no fear. We're going to be okay." And then God says this interesting thing, "Why do you cry out to me? Tell the Israelites to go forward. And you lift up your rod and hold your arm over the sea and split it." Right? So I'm curious, what do you think is going on? Why would God be intervening? I'll put the text back up here. To say, "Why do you cry out to me? Tell the Israelites to go forward." What's happening in this scene here, and what are we supposed to take from this connection that God is making? First, Moses in his interaction with the Israelite people, and then now God saying to Moses, "Why are you crying out to me? Tell them to go forward." What lesson can we draw from this, or what can we gather about the state of the Israelite mentality, Moses' mentality, or what God is trying to do with the Israelite people at this point? Merle?
He wants them to be gracious that he's getting them out of this, God. And Moses is complaining because they're complaining at him. And, you know, Moses is supposed to be a leader, and God's getting mad because Moses isn't being a leader.
Okay.
That's pretty much what I'm getting from it.
Yeah. The Israelites are complaining to Moses. Then Moses then complains to God, and Moses, according as Merle is pointing out, isn't necessarily being the leader that he should be, and so he's calling out to God, and then God is saying, "Come on, why are you complaining to me?" Jeff?
This is just another example of their crisis in true faith. They have not developed true faith in God, even though they've seen 10 miracles. They've been removed from Mitzrayim, and yet they don't truly believe. And it won't happen for another 40 years, hopefully, but it's the process which doesn't take very quickly.
Great. Yes, they are still struggling with this idea of faith in God, right? And as we will see, this is the first of many, 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 many complaints and moments where the Israelites fail to have faith in God, even though they just had these miracles of the 10 plagues that they got through, and even though they are about to witness another significant miracle, even potentially more mighty than those that came before, there is, what we're getting here is a reticence of faith and trust in God. And I think also, as we see what their references to the past, I think here we're also getting what happens with all of us when we go through a process of trying to move from this spiritual or emotional state of being enslaved to something. In other words, when we think about enslavement, in the way I see this in a psychological sense, is really those things that have held us back from being our true selves, from discovering our true nature, for holding us back from our passions, our desires, the things that we know would be good for us on the deepest of levels. And yet, of course, there are so many things that can hold us back from from doing that. Here we see with the Israelites this desire almost to, it would be much easier to stay in that slave mentality, to go back to Egypt, to just be caught in that world. So what? You're going to take us out of something that wasn't good for us, but at least we were used to it, right? Think about, I was just talking to someone the other day who said, I have this job. I'm lucky to have a job, but at the same time, I hate my job. And I really don't know what to do because at least I have one. And I said, well, do you see a path forward where you can start to look for something else in another field or in another business? And this person said, I don't know. I wouldn't even know how to do that. At least I'm at least set right now. right? And that is something that a lot of people struggle with. We are set with, and we are surviving what we're experiencing right now. It's very hard to think about what change could look like. And here the Israelites are thinking, well, even though being enslaved really sucked, at least we knew what to do, and we knew the daily grind. And now you're going to take us out of that. You're putting us into a place of complete vulnerability, physically and emotionally. And now what are we supposed to do? So that, I think, is some of the internal struggles that we're experiencing. Jeff, did you want to add anything else? I can tell if their hand was still up from before or not.
Oh,
And then Jennifer.
I would just say that, the age of miracles hasn't left them. They've got a pillar of cloud and a pillar of fire, and they've got every sign of God's mastery over nature in front of them, and yet they still doubt and fear. And fear grows as the dust from the chariots increases and gets closer.
Great. Thank you. Jennifer.
Hey, thank you for having us. So I'm very grateful to all of you. I think, Jeff, you touched on, I think what I was going to say actually was that, okay, it's understandable that Moses's people are not trusting, but I was interested in when Moses talks to God and God says, why are you crying out to me? And how to interpret that, because it might be that God is saying, you take care of it, or don't worry, I've got it covered.
So what's your interpretation, Jennifer, of those two?
I think probably I would go with, I'd have to see the original Hebrew, because it could be that there's a little, not a trope, but it would depend on how you'd actually read the line. And so, but no, personally feeling, apparently, everything comes down to God. But then again, maybe if Moses sees that he can do this, the people need confidence, and Moses needs confidence that indeed he can lead and he will work this out.
Okay, great.
Works
and you bring up,
as usual.
Yes, it does. And Rashi, actually, Rashi's interpretation of this is that it's God saying, I got this, I will handle this. Where you could also read it as, Moses, you can handle this. Why are you calling out to me? You're the leader. This is the statement potentially of God saying, like in any leadership position, well, if you're the leader, the buck stops with you. I'm here, but you tell them to go forward. Have faith in yourself, right? Can you develop a faith in something bigger than yourself if you don't have faith in yourself? It's an interesting question that we should be asking ourselves, right? How can you build relationships with other people if you're not working on your relationship with yourself, right? And so maybe faith is a similar challenge where in order for us, and in order for the Israelite people to develop a sense of faith in God, they still have a lot of work to do in terms of developing faith in themselves, right? They are slaves at heart still, and will be for a very long time. So how can you even understand the world out there if you don't understand the world in here? But Rashi reads it as suggesting that this is God saying, "Don't worry, I got these people. I'm gonna take care of them." Sorry, Melanie, go ahead.
I think I'm thinking the pandemic and to keep the faith. A lot of people are worried about getting it, even though they know that we're not in a good situation. But you're listening every day that the vaccines are helping and we're going to get it. And so, yeah, I go along with keep the faith. Things are not so great now, but keep the faith and things are going to get better. And I say, try the vaccine. That's personally for me, but a lot of people may not want to. And, so there's, a lot of meanings. We had a former Rabbi Michael Mayerson in Westminster, and whenever he would send an email to me regarding whatever, he would sign it, keep the faith, or keep, So I like
that's
that.
Great.
I like to try to remember that.
That's great. Also a great movie. Not at all related to this topic, but
it
a
was.
wonderful movie. Gary, then Aviva, and then Miriam, and then Jennifer and Jeff.
I think in many cases, faith also includes some risk analysis. And I think that the Jewish people at the banks of the Red Sea should have done a little bit more risk analysis. They have the Egyptian soldiers behind them. If they decide they're going to go back into slavery, probably they won't get back. Probably they'll be killed. They've already seen what God can do. And it really, to me, requires a lot more risk to go back into slavery than it does to follow Moses and go across the sea. First of all, if the sea doesn't open, you could always swim back to the shore and get killed by the Egyptians. So this satisfies what I think is the Jewish Descartes hypothesis, which is, instead of I think, therefore I am, I kvetch, therefore I am.
Nice. Thank you for that. Aviva, and then Miriam. Aviva, you want to unmute? No, maybe we'll come back to Aviva. Oh, okay.
So I think it's a three-way, because God is also out of the gate. He's never dealt with Moses or with the people, so he's not sure exactly how to act. It's a new experience. So it's a new experience for him. What should he put pressure on Moses? Should he put pressure on the people? So it's a three-way learning process where you have to sort of link each other and understand each other. So it's just not two, it's a threesome. And I think that's where the beauty comes in, because we're all connected in some way. And then the other very silly thing is, have you tried to teach a child to say please and thank you? And how long does that take for it to sink?
Yep. Even adults still need to work on that sometimes. So, yes.
Right. So all these things that basically this motley group of people is coming out from this narrow place, you're asking them more than they can actually embrace. So it's not an easy process, and everybody has to be patient and make little baby steps.
Great,
Voila.
Thank you. So great. So I think two things that stand out to me from what you're saying. One, we have to recognize where people are in order to judge them appropriately. Like if we're already starting to judge the Israelites on categories of being a free people when they've just been freed from slavery, that's inappropriate for us to judge people and not take into account where they are. And I think the other piece that stands out to me is this idea, as you say, it's the three-way, right? That maybe faith is not just a personal thing, or maybe not even between you and God. It requires a multitude of connections and relationships in order to be established, right? And here we have God, we have Moses, we have the Israelites, that the development of faith and trust requires a variety of networks to come together in order for it to really develop appropriately. Thank you, Aviva. Miriam.
It's the pandemic herd. You know how unless we have enough people getting vaccinated and we achieve that of the herd immunization, it's the same thing with this situation.
Mm-hmm.
Unless everybody buys into it, it's not going to move forward.
Yep. Thank you. Aviva, then Phyllis, and then Jennifer. Go ahead, Miriam.
Thank you, Rabbi, because I have looked at this passage for many years, and I've done everything for many years, of course, and very fortunate, I consider myself. At any rate, I see it differently today. I see Moses differently, because God is saying to him, almost in wrath, but it sounds like he's a little annoyed. Why do you cry out to me? Speak to the children of Israel and let them journey forth. In other words, I think Moses was definitely showing faith, not like the children of Israel, and it's, as you said many times, they complain in the desert. But you see, when Moses hit the rock, instead of speaking to it, he took it upon himself as a maybe leader to do it. At any rate, he was wrong in God's eyes and punished severely beyond measure. Now here we see Moses. He was a leader, but he was being very courteous to God. He knew that God was leading him, Moses. Moses was leading the Israelites. God was also leading them. And therefore, Moses simply asked him, what should he do? And then God told him, don't fear, and tell the people not to fear. But I see Moses as being wrongly reprimanded. How should Moses know that he's supposed to lift up his arm and split the sea? Where would that come from? It would only come from God. And therefore, Moses did the right thing by asking God what to do. And he did the opposite of the rock. He didn't take any responsibility upon himself as a leader. He felt that God should first talk.
Great.
The rock did too much and took too much responsibility.
Thank you, Miriam. That's a great interpretation. Phyllis and then Susan. And then Jennifer. And I don't know, Jeff, if you still have your hand up or not, but you'll be after that. Go ahead, Phyllis.
I think in terms of the state of mind of the Israelites, they, as much as they left slavery, they left their homes and they're out in the middle of nowhere. They don't know where they're going. They probably don't have a lot of things with them that made them comfortable. And it's probably incredibly scary.
Yes, you're right. Think about how much of the Torah takes place in the desert and what the desert represents, right? A desert is a liminal place that you really don't settle in, right? Usually, at least for humans, even nomadic tribes, you go through it, but you can't really settle in a desert. And much of the Israelite experience for much of the Torah, and really, I think then symbolically and spiritually what it's supposed to represent is that much of our journey is one through a desert where we have to always be navigating our way through it, where really the stars can guide us. But in terms of physical reminders of where we are, there are very few of them potentially. And so especially, as Phyllis is saying, to leave your homes and to be thrust into this desert landscape and everything that a desert represents is completely overwhelming, right? And so as we will see throughout most of the Torah, that overwhelming feeling of being in a desert mentality is something that the Israelites continue to struggle with. So thank you. Susan, and then Jennifer.
One, I would totally agree with Miriam. And I was going to say, it doesn't say in the text that Moses asked God. They use the word Lord here. They don't say that he asked God. He's quieting the people down in the section we read. And then the Lord said to Moses, why do you cry out to me? We don't see him doing that. And then there are the instructions, physically what to do. He didn't have that before. The other thing is we've been talking about people forget. And speaking of a current situation, when normally I don't get into this, but we had a riot on the Capitol steps. And then people are forgetting the intensity and the meaning of it. I can't believe that. We're talking just a couple of weeks, and it was visible on television and the like. And then now we're going to go and forget that. So memories are short. The past is often romanticized. That's it. And yes, they had the security. So I'm seeing a big gap in the text between what Moses does correctly by calming the people, then God saying, okay, no more words and prayers, take action, and giving it. And then we go down to the angel of God, just moving on a bit. Verse 19, who had been going ahead of the Israelite army, now moved behind them. Where do we have the angel of God in this business before?
Before this moment?
Before this moment, and it says who had been going ahead of them. It was just the cloud and the pillar of fire.
We had the angels with Lot, but that's in another kind of
That's another deal.
Thing.
And
Right.
the angels before the tents announcing the future birth. So they come at various times, but now it just reappears. But it said it had been going.
So yes, thank you for pointing that out. I don't have a great answer for you in terms of that, other than it is an interesting, like so many different things in the Torah where you have these interesting little cues to things like angels, or earlier in the book of Genesis, references to giants who were in relationships with humans.
The Nephilim.
The Nephilim. So there are a lot of really interesting points. So thank you for all those points, Susan, as always. Jennifer.
What's so wonderful about the Torah is I'm listening to everyone saying, yeah. And you all have said, what's so great about the Torah is it can support all of this. And I love the idea that, the three-way learning, although God knows that he is going to take these people and sort of cleanse their slave mentality for the next 40 years. He already knows that. But what I'm wondering is just a slightly different slant too would be that he also knows he's going to give the Torah to Moses, and his laws are going to come into human hands, and we are going to do what we will with them. And so I'm wondering if this is a little bit of not a foreshadowing, but Moses, this Torah is going to become yours and your people's, and you're going to have to learn how to make it your own. So you do this with the people, just in anticipation.
Yeah, I think that's true. And I think it's actually something that Moses has been struggling with his whole life. From the moment he meets God at the burning bush, he was starting to question his role, his legitimacy of being a leader. And I think he continues to struggle with that actually through his whole journey, which I think is a really good, important lesson for us to keep in mind when we think about leadership, that actually maybe some of the most valuable leaders are those who continue to maintain some of that questioning of themselves and have both humility and a willingness to question whether or not they're doing the right thing, because by even asking that question, you are at least putting yourself in a position of having to recognize various perspectives. So I think you're right. I think this could be interpreted as God yet again saying, just as he did early on in Moses' life, you can do this, and I'm here with you, but you need to do this. And we'll see, depending on if we get there, at least, I don't know if we'll get there together, but you can look at the source sheet towards the end, what happens towards the end of this Torah portion, which I actually think is a shift in how we see the role of the community and the role of the leader when Moses is standing on the mountain with Joshua and Hur, holding up his arms. We start to see a slightly different approach, and almost as though there's a critique about we have to move not only in this Torah portion, but the Israelite people need to start to move away from relying completely on God to provide everything for them. And they need to start to create a society where there's accountability amongst one another. And that leadership does not just literally come from above or come from one person, but how do you begin to establish, especially since Joshua is first talked about in this Torah portion, and he will become the leader after Moses later on. How is this both foreshadowing for the future, but also trying to help all of us think about what does it mean to shift into a more healthy leadership model? And of course, that gets expanded upon next week in Yitro, before we get the Ten Commandments, how Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, really helps Moses to reestablish the whole chain of command for the Jewish people. Jeff, did you want to say something?
This really needs to be looked at in a second way about Moses. This is really one of the first crises of his confidence and faith as well. As you go through this Parsha and he splits the sea, what doesn't he have the strength and courage and faith to do? Walk into the sea. He is unable to lead the people into the sea, and it has to be Nachshon who does this. And yet it's a foreshadowing of multiple episodes of his crisis of faith throughout the stories that come into the desert narrative. So Moses is yet unrefined in his own faith and strength. And though it develops through the stories, at this point, he himself has, I think, a crisis of confidence in several ways here.
Okay, thank you. Okay, let's keep going and see if we can get past the sea to the other side at least. Okay, so I skipped the part where we're actually crossing the sea. And of course, as I showed that picture in the beginning, that we have built into the crossing of the sea, Michamocha, at least part of the prayer of Michamocha. Not all of the prayer of Michamocha is found in this text, but elements of it, including the first line, are there. So, of course, every day we are reminded of that moment where we are going through that sea. But here we have, when we get to the other side, it says, then Miriam the prophetess, Aaron's sister, took a timbrel in her hand, and all the women went out after her and danced with timbrels, or drums actually in Hebrew. And Miriam chanted for them, sing to the Lord, for he has triumphed gloriously. Horse and driver he has hurled into the sea. So we have a really important statement here about the role of women, and especially Miriam, right? And we think about Miriam throughout the rest of the book. We think about, now there's either the orange that goes on the Seder plate, and we have references to Miriam during the Seder itself. But here she is declared a prophet or prophetess. Right? There are not many people that are declared prophets in the Torah. And here we have, right after the crossing the sea, as we are truly starting to begin the journey towards freedom, the first person that's called out as a prophet is not Moses, it's not Aaron, it is Miriam. And the role that she plays traditionally, that she is the one who brings water to the Jewish people, and that when she dies later on in the Torah, right after she dies, they complain about a lack of water, because the idea was that there was a well, that she provided this sustenance, right? And how do we look to not only women, but how do we look to the characters who sustain us? And here Miriam is put up on a pedestal, rightly so, as one of those people. Susan, did you want to say something?
Oh, I just wanted to say something. I had a class yesterday on Jung and the Kabbalah, and he focused on women and the symbolism of women. And of course, the sea is a major symbolism of women. Water, certainly the wells, containers, and they're all through, incredibly, there's so many symbols of women and their nurturing and fructifying values. And it's quite appropriate that Miriam is dancing there after the waters part, and how much of her symbolism continues throughout. We skipped over Nachshon, and I thought that this is a really, did you do that?
That's because he's not in the Torah. That's why I skipped over it.
Because it's a midrash.
It's a midrash, and there are actually a few midrashim about Nachshon and various stories about Nachshon. I skipped over it. Partly because I think Rabbi leaders spoke about it at Shabbat last week. Not everyone tunes in necessarily to all our Shabbat stories. But also because we could spend a lot of time on Nachshon, but I thought there were other things that are also really valuable in the Torah portion. But for those who don't know the story of Nachshon, it is a midrash. The rabbis tried, as Jeff was pointing out, with this the hesitancy of Moses and his unwillingness potentially to walk into the water. The rabbis were really struggling with trying to figure out, is this all God, or did humans actually play a role in bringing about this miracle, right? What's the human role in bringing about change? So they thought of Nachshon, the character who supposedly is the one who really went into the water, some say up to past his nose, so that he could no longer breathe anymore. And that's when the sea parted, right? So that it was based on this individual's willingness to take a risk, to dive in, so to speak. And it was only after that, and that type of leadership, that the miracle was able to occur. It wasn't just Moses lifting his staff. So it is a great story. Yeah, go ahead, Susan.
And so there was one thing too that the midrash, thank you for pointing that out. You're right, it is a midrash, but it also points out that Nachshon was married to Elisheva, the sister of Aaron, in which case it brings in Aaron's a sibling, into the story, and then there's Miriam. So we have both siblings of Moses participating in this revelation. And then speaking now of women as well, doesn't the Song of Miriam find echoes and repetitions in the Song of Deborah, then later on the judge? So we've got that same kind of fearlessness and jubilation in that sense of having a victory.
Yes, and I think also we have the importance of the ritual of when we have gone through an experience that has profoundly changed us or has the potential to change us, that we need to celebrate that. You can't just keep going with life and continue on the journey without marking that moment. And I think here we have both the importance of women playing a central role in being able to express parts of the human condition that maybe otherwise are dormant in men, if we want to go onto the gender track. But also we have this idea that there is something really powerful, as we find even in our services today, right? And if you look at Psalm 150, which we recite regularly, the role of music in helping us to navigate those transitional moments. And it's not just words, it's not just you move on with life, but how do you really celebrate? And I think the Torah is teaching us here one of the ways that we need to celebrate really significant moments in our lives. And it comes with dancing, it comes with music and singing, but on the baseline, you don't just keep going. You have to mark that moment. And that's something that Jews, we take very seriously. If you think about all the rituals that we have marked throughout a life cycle, throughout the year, all of our holidays, all of these things are significant. We can't forget that. And that's a really important thing that I think is pointed out here. Jennifer and then Jeff.
Just quick question. So why isn't, I think Jeff, you mentioned, unless I'm wrong, Moses doesn't, he's afraid, he holds back to crossing the sea. So, and then I'm rereading, it never mentions that Moses crosses. Why, I'm thinking of, when George Washington rode in front of his troops and inspired them, and it meant so much to them. So why does unless I'm reading it wrong, why do they leave that out then of him actually crossing?
Well, I think just like in the Seder, we don't focus so much on Moses. We take Moses out of the Seder. There's not a lot of passages that focus on the role of Moses, the individual. A lot of the Passover Seder focuses on God, and one of the reasons given is that if you put too much emphasis on one person, and specifically the role of Moses, then you see this as the story of Moses and his accomplishments. And that makes it harder for us to connect to the story, because as soon as it becomes someone else's story or someone else's journey or only the result of their accomplishments or failures, it's very hard to have a universal application of that concept or the teaching. So I think just as we remove Moses from the Seder, I think here this is about a collective move. This is not about Moses leading the people, but that for that moment when they are crossing through that sea, this is a collective move. And I think the reinforcement that it's not about the leader, but it's about a whole collective who are about to make this significant transition. Jeff.
Yeah, I'm glad you have brought, can you hear me? I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I'm glad you brought up the concept of the actual emotional tone of the people. You've got the men and you've got the entire population that has just moved from abject fear of death, with the Egyptians thundering down, with an exposure to the disruption of all the laws of nature that they know. And they're carrying this tremendous load of awe and or fear. And the great difference in the sexes is that women are the keepers of all emotion. And they are the ones who at this point are absolutely needed through Miriam to take those emotions and subdue them, to create a harmonious feel, to return to normalcy. And women have this remarkable power to look only at the emotional well-being, so to speak. And their efforts here are absolutely vital in settling a population that has just been totally turned upside down in our world of true nature by the events that have happened. So this is a remarkable comment, direct and indirect, about the role of women throughout the Torah.
Yes, thank you. Okay, I want to show, speaking, we mentioned Midrashim, rabbinic stories to fill in the gaps. I want to point out this is a famous one that comes from this section of the Torah where, of course, Miriam and all the Israelites are dancing, and then God, this is God being quoted here according to the Midrash, my creatures are drowning in the sea, it is not a time for the full expression of joy, right? So this is a famous Midrash about the fact that even God is sad about the destruction of humanity, right? That even though the Israelites have the right to celebrate, we still have to temper our sometimes our desire to celebrate the destruction of others, and that the Torah really still struggles with this idea of, can you have a complete celebration when humanity is being destroyed and when people die? No, we have to temper that to some degree. So that's just a famous midrash that I thought everyone should be aware of. Okay, let's keep going. Okay, now we're going to begin the kvetching. As Gary pointed out earlier, there's a lot of kvetching that we have in the Torah, and we have multiple instances as soon as we get on the other side of that sea. So then Moses caused Israel to set out from the Sea of Reeds. They went on into the wilderness of Shur, and they traveled 3 days in the wilderness and found no water. They came to Marah, but they could not drink the water of Marah because it was bitter, hence the name Marah. That is why it's called the name Marah. And the people grumbled against Moses, saying, "What shall we drink?" So he cried out to the Lord, and the Lord showed him a piece of wood, and he threw it into the water, and the water became sweet. Okay, so this is the first grumbling post crossing the sea, this of water, and the complaint about they have no water to drink. Okay, but it doesn't stop there. In the wilderness, the whole Israelite community grumbled against Moses and Aaron. The Israelites said to them, "If only we had died by the hand of the Lord in the land of Egypt when we sat by the flesh pots, when we ate our fill of bread, for you have brought us out into this wilderness to starve this whole congregation to death." And the Lord said to Moses, "I will rain down bread for you from the sky, and the people shall go out and gather each day that day's portion, that I may thus test them, to see whether they will follow my instructions or not. But on the 6th day, when they apportion what they have brought in, it shall prove to be double the amount they gather each day." So Moses and Aaron said to all the Israelites, "By evening you shall know it was the Lord who brought you out of the land of Egypt, and in the morning you shall behold the presence of the Lord, because he has heard your grumblings against the Lord. For who are we that you should grumble against us? Since it is the Lord," Moses continued, "who will give you flesh to eat in the evening and bread in the morning to the full. Because the Lord has heard the grumblings you utter against him. What is our part? Your grumbling is not against us, but against the Lord." Okay, so there are a few different pieces here, right? We have first the water, now the grumbling against the lack of food, and now God saying, through Moses and Aaron, "I'm going to give you food, double portion on the day right before Shabbat," right? So this is some of the reasons why we have a double portion, two challah loaves for Shabbat on Friday night. And it's a test. And then we also have this interesting thing where Moses and Aaron are saying, why are you complaining to us? It's not our problem. It's not our fault. It's God's. Direct your issues towards God, not towards us. We're just the mouthpiece, right? So we have a few interesting things here. Jennifer.
Two things. It reminds me of these people who knew nothing but deprivation, and now they say they want meat, they need bread. It's like they're living in a hotel, and in a way, and I understand the several multi-layered thing here that God is in control of everything, and that whole other layer. But the idea that, and he's empowered Moses, but there's going to come a time where the people are going to need to feel that they can do things for themselves. So just a comment. Yeah, it just seemed like a radical. Now they're getting anything and everything they asked for, no matter who they're complaining to. But
Right. And they're also still thinking about, oh, the good old days back in Egypt where they had everything they wanted, which of course was not the case, but goes back to maybe it was Susan or someone who made the comment about, how we romanticize the past and how we do that with our own lives, right? I mean, when we're in the midst of a really difficult situation, we feel the weight of that. And sometimes once we get past that, or even as a nation, one of these things, both as a nation and individually, that we have to be careful of is that we don't romanticize to the point where we create a false past, right? And that we've created false memories in order to try and deal with everything going on within us, right? We cannot forget what happened on January 6th at the Capitol. And how do we make sure that we remind ourselves that we set up systems by which we can be reminded, and how do we enact change in order to make sure that kind of thing never happens again? So we do have, again, this romanticism of the past. Okay, I want to keep going just so we can try and get through a little bit more before we end. In the evening, quail appeared and covered the camp, and in the morning there was a fall of dew about the camp. When the fall of dew lifted, there over the surface of the wilderness lay a fine and flaky substance, as fine as frost on the ground. When the Israelites saw it, they said to one another, "What is it?" For they did not know what it was. And Moses said to them, "That is the bread which the Lord has given you to eat. This is what the Lord has commanded. Gather as much of it as each of you requires to eat, an omer to a person, for as many of you as they are. Each of you shall fetch for those in his tent." And the Israelites did so, some gathering much, some little. But when they measured it by the omer, he who had gathered much had no excess, and he who had gathered little had no deficiency. They had gathered as much as they needed to eat. And Moses said to them, "Let no one leave any of it over until morning." But they paid no attention to Moses. Some of them left of it until morning, and it became infested with maggots and stank. And Moses was angry with them. Then Moses said, "Eat it today, for today is the Sabbath of the Lord." I skipped a little section here. "You will not find it today on the plain. 6 days you shall gather it. On the seventh day, the Sabbath, there will be none." Yet some of the people went out on the seventh day to gather, but they found nothing. And the Lord said to Moses, "How long will you men refuse to obey my commandments and my teachings? Mark that the Lord has given you the Sabbath, therefore he gives you 2 days' food on the 6th day. Let everyone remain where he is. Let no one leave his place on the 7th day." So the people remained inactive on the 7th day. Okay, we still have, again, a critique of the Israelites, and I think a critique of all humans even today, right? Even when God says, just go collect, when the command is, go collect what you need for yourself. Not too much, not too little. There are still people who go out and either collect too much or too little. Now, God makes it so that at the end, they all have exactly what they need. But then, even when God says, I'm going to give you double portion on the 6th day to make sure you have enough for Shabbat, don't go out on the 7th day. There are still people who go out on the 7th day looking for that, and they don't find any. And there are some who don't listen to this idea of take what you need and make sure you eat it when you don't leave it for later. But some of them do, and then it gets infested with maggots and it gets destroyed, right? So I think there are a bunch of lessons that we're supposed to be learning here. Any thoughts? What do you take away? What's the Torah trying to teach us here? Merle.
We don't need to be gluttonous. It's like, how much can you hoard? I'm just thinking of it food-wise. At the beginning of the pandemic, people were grabbing everything off the grocery store shelves, whether it was something they ate or didn't eat, and just because it was there. And all I wanted was some tuna fish to have in the house in case the freezer got empty. But, I'm thinking of what we saw at the time we were in Mexico, and we stopped at a grocery store because you couldn't get anything here. And people there weren't hoarding. They were being really careful. And we got here and it was like there were lines to get into the grocery store and people were taking everything. How much can you eat? How much doesn't spoil? I mean, it's like you just, I still see it. People, they're so afraid they won't have food for the next day.
Yeah. I mean, go ahead.
Necessary.
Yeah, I mean, also not only the food. Think about it, the toilet paper, right? The psychology about of all the things it was even more the hoarding of toilet paper than food in some cases, right? What's the psychology behind that? Especially when your bowels are not going to be changing dramatically during a pandemic from when it's not a pandemic, right? And yet there was that need to hoard, and of all the things, right? One of the most intimate things that people use is something that they needed to hold on to and grasp, right? But, and think about, of course, buffets, and whether it's a cruise ship or some of those restaurants, right? Where we have set up, unfortunately, a system in which there is always more to get, and you should pile up as much as you can, and that we're never satisfied. And I think, again, what we see in this Torah portion is this has been a challenge for all of humankind forever, right? This is something that we always need to be aware of, and we need to check ourselves. We're not going to have God necessarily coming down and putting maggots in our food, but what does it mean that the things that we leave over turn into negative things, right? Is that could have been for someone else who needed it. Those are great points, Merle. Susan, did you want to add?
Yes, I mean, I think that's the key point. And I always, having enough, come back to Ben Zoma's comment, who is happy? One who is satisfied with one's lot. And I think that, and Maimonides always talks about the me, not too much, not too little. So then I think of, gluttony in our age, even before the toilet paper issue, which is funny. But wealthy people who have to have, and we had, as I know some that have 10 cars, and high-end cars, and stack up Imelda Marcus footwear. There are people in our society. And then the question is, are the wealthy happier because they have more? And probably not, because it feeds on itself, so they need more and more, like a slot machine in Vegas. So I think there are all sorts of things, questions raised too. Are poor people more likely to be, when you speak of faith in God, are they more likely because they know how dependent they are on God, or wealthy because they're grateful to God for what they have? So I think it raises all these ancillary issues as well. But I mean, the chief one here is gluttony, and then also fear. I think the toilet paper was panic. And I see panic now for people in my age bracket trying to get shots.
Yes.
All the places I contacted don't have appointments and they're saying we don't have the material. So it's it's a major panic, and that's the first question my friends always ask. And then one said, "You're going to be so jealous of me because I got a shot," and I thought, what kind of statement is that? What? Yeah, it's really to be jealous of someone because they wait it out. Have the patience. The vaccines, thank God, that I think is a blessing of God, that the scientists, and I thank God for that they came up with a vaccine. And we have hope now that we'll get the vaccine out to a lot of people. Wow. So that's the other kind of, I think there's a group panic as well that push things.
Thank you. Jennifer, yes.
Just a quick thing. This can also, and thank you again for everyone's comments. I'm just enlightened. That this could also just be a story, also another dimension about setting boundaries. Because remember, these slaves, I want to say Mozart, Moses has to figure out his boundaries as a leader and as a servant of God. These people who he's leading out, and all decisions were made for them. No was told to them. So now they're having to learn to set boundaries for themselves for the first time. So this is a growing process, and God is teaching them. That's just another slant on the story. Great. So, like with children, giving them appropriate decisions to make God isn't saying, look, I'll leave it up to you. You can return to Egypt if you want. It's more like just how much food are you going to take?
Right.
So,
Right. And even the phrase, the children of Israel, right? In
the
some ways,
children of
they
Israel.
are treated like children
Yeah,
as they wander through the desert.
they have to learn
Yes.
boundaries.
Well, we're coming to the end, but I do encourage you to look at the end of the Torah portion. A few important things to point out. Number one, as we mentioned at the beginning, what Moses, in terms of Moses and or God being the one who creates the miracle that allows for the crossing of the sea. I think, as we've found also in these complaints that the Israelites make, a miracle alone does not change a person's trajectory in the world. That as much as we would love for one miracle to be able to transform our condition, at least according to the Torah in this Torah portion, it is not enough to change the trajectory of our path to experience one miracle. It takes a lot more than that, because even the Israelites who got through the plagues and then saw this incredible miracle of the sea parting for them, they complained 3 days later, starting 3 days later, right? So that was not enough to change them. So miracles are incredible, and I do believe that miracles still happen, but we can't rely on them in order to change ourselves or the society in which we live. And then we'll find later in this Torah portion Moses' reliance on Joshua and Hur, and basically the reliance on the community in order to beat the Amalekites, to beat Amalek. That we begin to see this shift, as we talked about a little earlier, the idea that the leadership cannot rely strictly on one individual, but that it requires a community endeavor, and that we're going to build on that at the beginning of next week's Torah portion. And there's some interesting things about Amalek itself, right? This idea, the rabbis talk about one of the reasons that why Amalek was so bad. It's this group of people that are going to come up throughout the rest of the Torah and still make their way into other holidays such as Purim, where it's thought that maybe Haman is a descendant of the Amalekites. We have this really interesting thing where God says they will be our enemy forever, and we are required to blot them out. And it's actually a scribe, a sofer, who writes a Torah, literally is supposed to write Amalek out on a piece of paper, of parchment, and literally blot it out when they are writing a Torah. So interesting that we have, even though we as a people rely so much on memory, there is a group of people that the Amalekites represent that are always out to get us. And we know from history that's true. It's not just one group. It's been a variety of groups, but there is always a force out there that is trying to destroy us. And this Torah portion really starts that psychology that is going to continue throughout the rest of Jewish history and throughout the rest of the Torah, for sure. And what does it mean that we're supposed to blot them out when we are a people who rely so heavily on memory? So I definitely urge you to look into that, to look at the end of the Torah portion and look at Amalek and look at the slight shift of leadership that we find. So I want to thank you all. Great discussion as always. There will be Torah study again next week, and I really hope that you have a wonderful Shabbat this weekend. So wishing you a Shabbat Shalom. There's a beautiful Shabbat Shirah. This is a special Shabbat. It's called the Shabbat of Song, because of the song of the crossing of the sea. And Cantor Lisa Picot, along with some cantors from around Los Angeles and around the country, have put together a very special and beautiful Shabbat service for tonight, so you can stream that on your computers at 6 p.m. tonight. So thank you all very much, and Shabbat Shalom.
Rabbi.
Thank you so
Yes.
Rabbi,
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Thank you.
could you tell us what next week's portion is?
Yes, next week's portion is Yitro, Yitro. It's the Torah portion that includes the Ten Commandments.
One of the
Okay.
greatest
So
representations.
You know the number?
Do I know the number of, you mean where in Exodus it starts? Is that what you mean?
Yes, please.
Exodus chapter 18 is the beginning.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Thank you
Thanks for
so
everything.
much.
All right, everyone.
Have a great Shabbat.
You too. Shabbat Shalom, everyone.
Shabbat shalom.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you, everyone.
One of the greatest representations of the Israelites at this time is in Cecil B. DeMille's Exodus, and you see the Edward G. Robinson character who keeps complaining and trying to get Jews to turn around. One of the most succinct characteristics of the disgruntled Israelites just before they enter the desert. It was amazing when you think